Thank you. It's great to be here in Berlin. I've spent the last few days here finding out much more about the challenges of government, which Maria didn't say this. I'm also a very ardent supporter of the UK Labour Party, having worked for Keir Starmer, Labour leader, as his policy director for his first 2.5 years. We hold our breath for 2 weeks' time, where we are hoping for a big turnaround in Labour's fortunes. You all know that we've been out of power for 14 years. Quite a lot has happened in that time, and we're obviously hoping that we can join back the centre-left parties that have started to become successful again, but in troubled waters, we would say. So that's me, and I'm based in the UK here today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our brilliant panel shortly. But first of all, I'm just going to present some headline findings, which haven't been released yet, but they are part of a project that PPI, the Progressive Policy Institute, based in the US, is doing jointly with DPZ. And it's on this crucial area of what are the policy and politics that we need for our, we've called it industrial heartlands, but we know what we mean in our respective countries, but that's actually really at the core of many of our political challenges. But this new industrial policy has come to the fore of our economic policy, but it's not all been plain sailing. There are, in the States, we look across at the States' economic performance, and we envy that economic performance, but it is not translating into support for Biden, as we will hear. So we want to find out a bit more about what our panelists think about that. Have we got the policy right? Is it the politics that aren't? Is it that we are impatient for change? So we're going to talk a bit about the sort of policy and politics there. And of course, in Germany too, we've seen a different overall economic performance, but we've seen regionally some areas where there have been a strong economic performance, but we're seeing support for this populist right, you know, the AfD over here. So we want to unpack some of that. We want to find out more about the solutions. So we are accepting of the premise, if you like, of insecurity. We have some answers. So this is very much about solutions. But we're finding some difficulties when we are in power in terms of implementing those. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what the panelists have to say to help us understand those challenges, but really to be in the space of what, as progressives, we do now. Just talking through these these findings, so I'm not going to give you lots and lots of slides or information, but it's just to give you a bit of a flavour. We asked a kind of representative sample in the US and Germany some kind of crucial questions, and I've got the privilege of introducing these findings, but really it's colleagues at DPZ, Paulina Fraulich and Sandra Ruth, who are responsible really for doing all of the hard work, so my thanks to you both. So our key findings, so we asked about the areas that you would expect, and some of it resonate in the paper that you may have seen. Please don't worry about reading those, because it will be difficult for you to read. Actually, that will too. So I'm just going to give you the headline then, which is, surprise, surprise. We asked, what are your top concerns? And economy and cost of living, far and away in both countries, far and away, are the most critical issues for people. So economy and cost of living come most importantly. So if you look at the sort of that graph towards the end, that's economy and cost of living, followed by migration. Higher concern in Germany than in the States, followed by climate change. So a couple of kind of conclusions for us. People do care about climate change. It is in and of itself an issue, but for them, top of mind, when they think of crisis, they're thinking of cost of living. I'm sure you found this in your own work too. We've also found that in Germany and in the States, people are really worried about the economic prospects for their country. So although the headline findings, particularly in the States, are encouraging, people are somewhat or very worried about their economic prospects. So it gives us this backup, if you like, that people have a material basis for their insecurity, and we'll talk a bit more about the non-material basis. Actually, I might not. Can anybody read these? Should I just ditch the slides?
No, it's good.
You can read them. You can read them. Great. Okay. So, but interestingly, we asked a bit more. So we dug a bit more into what are the policies. So what are some of the solutions? And similarly found that in the US and Germany, with quite different, I think, political cultures, preferences, histories, there's quite a lot of support for what you might consider kind of classic centre-left or social democratic responses, so particularly on protection of industry. So there's a lot of support for protection of industry. And if anything, people wanting to see more federal spending, if you like. Now, there's contradictions within all these things, so never ever take any of these poll headlines at first reading, because when you actually get to the, well, how do you pay for it, we come into some more difficulty. But there is, if you like, this dilemma, because we have continuing strong support for some of these quite sort of state-backed, social democrat associated policy, but we're not seeing the parties poll that same support. So we're going to sort of talk about why that is, and it'd be great. We'll have some time for your views too. On climate change, I think frustratingly, I feel often there's a kind of a climate change versus the economy or versus cost of living. Actually, and I've done a lot of polling with working class voters in the UK particularly, but also in the US, voters, they care about climate change. It's not just Green supporters or people for whom that's their top issue. For working class voters too, it does absolutely come into their top concerns, but it doesn't beat economy and cost of living. But I think it's important to note that voters are bothered about climate change. They see it as part of the challenges, and we will see what they think on solutions too. One of the things that we found interesting, may or may not have the graph here, is where we've talked about what are the policies that you want to see to equip your country for the future. So thinking about the future, what's most important to you? One finding that we were quite surprised and perhaps encouraged by was that in both countries, and in the US, Trump and Biden supporters, such strong support for education, science, and innovation. So there was real strong support for policies that would furnish people with a better education, but for science and innovation, these really future-facing policies. More so, there was some support for the green transformation, some support of establishment of new industries, but actually some of the things that we could be leading on and be seen to be leading on were supported. And then finally, we asked about the transatlantic partnership. So we've heard quite a lot about globalisation, deglobalisation, this inward looking. I mean, I'm speaking for the UK, who took ourselves out of the European Union, so I'm here to give nobody any lectures about inward-looking or outward-looking. But some of the encouraging findings we found from the survey were that voters in the US and in Germany perceived each other as shared values and strategic allies. A little bit of the difference between the two. So Germans more likely to see this as a strategic relationship. Those in the States more likely to see that as a partnership of shared values. But nonetheless, people in both countries were positive about the relationship between, wanted to see that continue. We are not seeing this kind of universal retreat from the world stage. There's been some excitement about. There's definitely wanting that to continue. So strong support. Those two bars at the end are the ones that are about what do you see the relationship as. But crucially, there's quite a significant proportion in the US who didn't know, who didn't want to say what they thought about that question. So there are some questions, I think, there. So finally, just to sort of wrap up our sort of headlines findings. So similarly to the research that you've already had, we're talking about security in a multi-dimensional way. So there is absolutely an economic and material basis for it, but that is not the only insecurity that people are facing. That despite the electoral challenges that our parties are having, the centre-left positions, those that you think of as classically centre-left, do hold continue to hold some support. And I didn't mention actually that not just that climate change came up as an important issue, but that voters in both countries wanted to see more government action on climate change, not less. So some interesting findings there. And this is come out in every survey, economy and cost of living being the most important concern for voters. So how can we have our solutions to be answers to the challenges they are facing in their everyday lives, rather than perhaps trading off the two between each other? So that's just the kind of starter stimulus. that I wanted to share with you. I'm now going to welcome our panel to the stage. We might need to get back up, everybody. So there we go. Perfect. Thank you. We've got a fantastic panel with speakers from Germany and the US I want to welcome. Let me introduce you first, and then I'll ask you to come up. We have Franziska Brantner, Parliamentary State Secretary, Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action in Germany. Welcome. Holger Mann, who is member of the German Parliament representing Leipzig. And Brencia, who is Political Director for the Democratic National Committee. And Tim Ryan, who is Senior Advisor to the PPI Campaign for Working Americans, also known as the former representative for Northeast Ohio in Congress for the last 20 years. So please, welcome to the stage. Do you want to go there? So we're going to do this as a conversation, really. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just give a little bit of a perspective from their place, anything that they want to say resonates or does not resonate from the findings that they've heard. I've got some questions for you, many questions, but hopefully we will have enough time for audience to bring in your points and questions too. So I'm going to start with Franziska, if I may. To give us your perspective on whether what you've heard so far in the conversations resonate for you and your place, and if you can tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, thank you for all of you being here. I just returned this morning from New York and met some of the colleagues in a room in DC like 2 days ago. So, and we exchanged exactly on these issues. So it's a pleasure to be in this joint space of grappling with the challenges. Yes, it certainly resonates. And I think we haven't, when it comes to how do we translate a geoeconomic policy into an industrial policy or an industrial policy into a geopolitical one, we have joint challenges. I think we haven't really found yet out how we can be protecting our industries without being protectionist. And without becoming nationalist and having that drive going in the wrong direction. I think that is one of the challenges we haven't really come to a good solution. A second one is how can we promote our industries in times of where others would like to cut funds and spending. We have that debate in Germany, but we will also have it in France with the Commission going into the budget. And I think, how we can link it to security and making it cheaper will come by time. We see it. It lowers the cost, but it's not always immediate. So the benefits are delayed in time. And that's usually a problem for politics, when you tell them it will become better, but right now it's not immediately much cheaper. So I think there are these time questions. How do we overcome this? How can we make quicker wins in terms of cost of living? And then the other, which are more conceptual, how can we, what are tools of promotion that are not linked immediately to the budget? And do not go into too deeply detailed regulation, which is then the other side. If you don't have money, you go for regulation, which becomes very burdensome. So what is a good mix in between? And if you do it only via pricing, in the US you don't have it, in Europe we have it, we find that it undermines very quickly the narrative of cost of living, and then you're back into the circle. So I think these are the challenges we face. And the protectionist part is one that I really worry about, because I think that some take our spins and turn them one further, and then you're in a corner you don't want to be in. So these are
very interesting, and we could deep dive in. But I'm going to go to each of the panelists first, and then we can deep into those questions. So I'm going to come to Holger, and then I'll be to Brencia next.
Okay, yeah. So last 3 years we struggled through some crises. The pandemic, also already mentioned, the war of Russia against Ukraine, and the rising energy prices, and after that the high inflation. And so the biggest topic of the people at this time and last vote was, of course, the increasing prices, and especially Also in cities as mine, as my hometown Leipzig, which is swirling and growing, and the successor of transition in the last 10 years was the topic of higher rents for housing. So, and I think the people are a little bit concerned about their future because of rising prices and uncertainty in economic progress. And so we have to take their concerns really have to deal with and give them hope that the transition, and especially the transition in energy market, they will benefit from. Because, for example, we had a special topic in Germany, it's called the Heizungsgesetz, or law for modernize the heating, where I think the only state in Europe who gives her inhabitants more than 20,000 euro for modernize their heating, but we lost this debate on populists to the populist criticism.
Yeah, well, that has been certainly been a topic that's come up this week in my discussions. So I'd love to come back to environmental policy and how we can make it more related to cost of living. Yeah. Thank you both. Brencia.
Yes. I agree with everything that was said. For us, as you all know, President Biden, Vice President Harris are running for re-election, and we also have several key elections up and down the ticket for Democrats in order for us to maintain the progress that we have made under their leadership. But our challenge is to make sure that we're not being dismissive of our voters who do feel the impacts of the rising costs of living. And while our economy is in a strong position and we are showing incredible progress, it is challenging to say, okay, the president, and with the help of Congressman Ryan, has passed some of the most pivotal legislation of our lifetime, investing in Americans, investing in higher wages, investing in job growth across the board, and your groceries are still expensive. And so making that connection, and also to your point about the longer term impacts when it comes to infrastructure, significant investments that this administration and Democrats have made. And a lot of those projects, shovels won't be in the ground until the next 4 years. So it's our job to continue telling that story about the investments and the real life impacts that voters have seen and will continue to see under Democrats.
Great, thank you. Tim?
I don't have a whole lot to add. I'm in complete agreement around the cost of living and expenses and rent, especially in the United States where that's a huge issue. Interest rates are high. The only thing I would really add is more contextual, and that is that for American workers, whether they're white or black or brown, men or women, manufacturing, retail, they have been traumatized for 40 years. So, this is not a snapshot in time. Why are they insecure right now? It's because even if you have a good job now in places like Ohio that I used to represent, in the industrial belt, Youngstown, between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, even if you have a good job, you're looking over your shoulder because your dad lost his job and it was so traumatic, and you've lost a few jobs, and maybe now you've latched on to a battery plant that's UAW, United Auto Workers, good wages, new contract. Even with all that, you're still looking over your shoulder. So I think as we have these conversations, you can't just say, hey, we did this or we did that or this is our policy. You have to see it in the context of what has the working class gone through in the last 40 or 50 years. And I'm 50 years old, and the steel mills collapsed in Youngstown when I was 6. So my entire adult life, and people who are my age now working in a steel mill still think I'm doing okay, But, and I think it's important for all of us who are either making policy or trying to influence voters to vote one way or the other, need to keep that in mind, because that will give you not the keys to the kingdom, but I think it will unlock your mindset into how best to communicate what people need and what they're going through.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to stick on policy first, and then let's come back to the kind of politics of it. But I want to go to Franziska's point around the point that you touched on, but which is really important in terms of protection and versus protectionism. The desire, the impetus from the public is that they want to feel protected. And if we think about our theme of security, when you are fearful, you want to be protected and you feel safe. And there is a good story from the populace, which is we'll keep you safe. We'll keep you safe because we'll keep those people out because they're the problem. And we will, essentially, as Trump instigated, it was that kind of disruption to the global order. Tell us more about your kind of concerns on the kind of policy of what that could do, where that might lead, and what you would want to advocate for as we're thinking about a different form of, as Schultz said, he was pushing us to think about what's the form of capitalism, what's the model of capitalism that we want to push for.
Yeah, 2 points. Allow me to say what I find very interesting in the American debate right now, and it's linked to inflation, which is also big here. I mean, in the US, inflation started earlier, already 2021. Here it was a bit later, mainly started to shoot with the Ukraine war. But there are a few things you can do that will raise inflation. And interestingly, I find that Trump is running on inflation, and all the measures he proposes will increase inflation. Yes. If you put on a tariff...
Welcome to America.
I know, but I find it incredible that this is not getting through. I'm like, he says he will put tariffs on all of the products. That usually raises inflation. He says we will stop migration, so you will have less offer on the American side, inside the US, to produce those products. So increased demand, lower offer, you will increase inflation, and then you have the third part, he will cut spending, so you even take out money off the system, so you will have, in another part where people cannot afford. So I find it, I was in the US talking to now a lot of people, I'm like, this is so interesting that he's running on inflation, all his measures will be inflationary. And why do we not get this message across when it comes to policy? And it's the same probably in our country, and so that I've been grappling about, and I think we have to find a good answer to that. That's why I think, just to put tariffs, I'm like, they will hurt us. They will make people's lives more expensive. And we can't want that. If you look at those numbers, that cost of living is their #1 priority. But we do not link it up to that protection, how do you protect without raising cost of living? And I think where we probably have to go more is to make this a new trade arena, which is more fair, which is not undercutting salaries or sustainable way of production. And I just got from a meeting, I don't know if any of you is aware, but I find this a fantastic initiative by New Zealand. It was of Jacinda Ardern. She started it and it's 5 years ago, and they finalized the negotiations. It's Switzerland, Iceland, New Zealand, Liechtenstein, and a couple of more small countries. And they have now a new trade deal on environmental goods and eco-labeling, and on phase out of fossil fuels. And I find this fantastic. They did this for 5 years. It's a very detailed trade agreement. And I think, let's make that big. Let's make that a joint progressive trade arrangement where we say, this is exactly how we translate our values, and this is how we recognize our standards, not just of the products, but of production. Because we don't have WTO standards on sustainable production. We have them on the product, but not on the way of producing them. And that is a big difficulty in our capitalist society. We don't have this. So they will present that next week, Monday, by the way. New Zealand is very happy they will present it. So that is where I think I would like us to go, to say, okay, this one hasn't worked because it has undercut middle classes and destroyed our climate. So we have to find new ways. And maybe we can get inspired by the small ones and make it big.
And Holger, I wanted to ask about your perspective on jobs. Like, how do we translate this industrial policy into jobs that work for the people in your district, in your area? Because part of what we're hearing is when the investment can come in, and that's a big part of the policy, is making sure that we get the kind of foreign direct investment that we want, the domestic investment that we want. It's not just state spending. How do we make sure that connects up with the needs in your place and the workforce that you have? Perhaps you could tell us a bit about your place.
Okay, so let's call my place Eastern Germany.
Yes, okay.
For instance, it's okay.
It's a big place.
Yeah, it's a big place. And I think we have to tell the stories of success. For example, in Leipzig now, the most Porsches were built. Nobody knows it, but it is so. Or BMW has doubled his production in the last 3 years to 600,000 vehicles. So that's a part of it, and it's a part of reindustrialization. After the fall of the wall, we had no industrial base, and also now high wages. Now there are people who get high wages and can tell this story of success, but only we have to secure that there a minimum wage so that the people can pay their rent. That it's a part, and we have now a discussion again in Germany about the Commission who says on which high the minimum wage should be, between at time a little over 12 euro and now should go over 14 euro, and it's also a part of, because insecurity will throw all or more voters to the populists and their narrow solutions. So, other point, science and science infrastructure. We are very successful in granting and founding scientific institutes, and for example, 2 big centers now in the eastern parts of Germany, and they deal with, for example, with the new chemistry future, so circular industry. Or we have founded 2 agencies, so the so-called Sprint, the Agency for Disruptive Innovation. Yeah, we both work on it with Franziska. Or the DAITI, that should secure transfer from our really competitive high schools. And this could be nucleus of new success, reindustrialization, and also startups. And after that, I can say we already had some big towns who are competitive also in Germany, but it will take 10, maybe 15 more years to be so successful that everybody get his benefits from it.
Do you think, if we were to ask voters in your place, so Eastern Germany, so it's a big area, what do they think the benefits of those investments are? So many of us have wanted a version of reindustrialization policy for a long time. We're starting to get it. So we're starting to get that. There's always been redevelopment programs, but this is a different form with much, much more impetus. If you went to some of those voters in East Germany and said, what do you think of this new, whether it's the Tesla plant, what have you, what would they be saying to you as a politician? What do we need to listen to?
If I talk to the workers at BMW, for example, they are proud.
Yes.
And that's because after fall of the wall, the most workers lost their jobs, and there was a long period of unemployment, and we also couldn't afford enough jobs for the people. Their qualifications wouldn't demand further. So now there's a new crowd of workers, and we call them the new workers class in East Germany, and we need more of them. But nevertheless, there are many rural regions where aren't these successful big industries. And therefore, in Saxony, we invest through thirds of all funds for structural change in scientific and educational institutions. And on most times, that will benefit the next generation, but it's a way to deal with.
Yes. And I wonder if there's something, as I'm thinking about Brencia, when it was Biden who said it's not trickle down, was it middle out? Middle out,
exactly.
not bottom up, but middle out,
Yes.
which I think spoke to those of us who are policy wonks. Absolutely. We understood that and liked that. But that sense of perhaps we need to be aware that the experience of this reindustrialization might, within one place, feel like it's trickled down again, whereas actually the trickle needs to hurry up a bit, turn the taps on, or whatever it is to help those benefits, be it not just for the next generation, but so that adult workers and others start to see what the benefits are. We've, many of us have looked, we're inspired in many ways by the Inflation Reduction Act and the package of measures, obviously, that Biden put in, and the sums of spending that are now, certainly not going to be possible in a UK context with the interest rates the way they are. But it made us think, is industrial policy enough? So partly our story is this takes time. We've had 30, 40 years of one story. 2 or 3 years of a new story is too soon, perhaps, to expect. But I'm also thinking, yes, but what else might we need to be doing to make sure that this form of capital really benefits people? Is there a conversation in the States, or should there be, about what are the other levers, or what are the other economic policies we need to do so that the people that you're speaking to and will be in the run-up to November and beyond can start to say, yeah, I'm starting to feel the benefit. So what do we need to do beyond reindustrialization?
Well, I think that the points that Congressman Ryan made about trauma and the way that we talk about these investments with working families is key. So for us, what we're trying to focus on is pivoting from, yes, billions and billions of dollars invested, and it is transformational, but what does this mean for you and your families holistically? Whether it's healthcare, capping the cost of insulin at $35 for seniors, and the Republicans have made very clear that they would like to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. So those are all aspects that, like, point blank, we can point to. This will only increase prices. This will only increase the impacts of your family's access to what you need to survive. And how do we make the connection between, yes, we have made these investments into more jobs, higher paying jobs, but making sure that we're showing tangible examples of what those jobs will be, and helping to educate people on connecting with those opportunities. And one of the greatest aspects of this administration and strengths that I see is that a lot of our labor unions will say that President Biden is the most pro-union president that they have worked with. And so that is why he has endorsements from the building trades, from the United Auto Workers, and so just overwhelming support from unions, because he is investing in good union-paying jobs. And so it's also working through the messengers. When we are partnering with our union partners, they are very much like, we're going to do member-to-member outreach because we can speak to our workers and their issues in ways that you all can support, but we know our members. They want to hear about pensions. They want to hear about wages. They want to hear about the issues that are impacting them. So to me, that is also a tactic and strategy that we are really leaning on, is the messengers that work daily with our various our coalition, which is big and diverse. And there are leaders in that coalition that have the authority and are able to make that connection directly in communities that sometimes this big government entity, the billions of dollars, that the economic talks might not make that direct connection. And so just amplifying those voices.
Yeah, indeed. Tim, on that topic, you talked about the way a family would feel, how a working class person feels, like there's the material, but there's also the psychologically. But people's places and communities are part of that story. What could we do better as a centre-left to connect up our big ideas with the experience that people have in their place? And is there a future politics for us which is much more connected to people's place? Tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, I think just to build on what was just said, I think the union piece is really key, because you got to remember in America it's 5 states that are going to decide the election, sad as that may be. And 3 of them are industrial states with strong unions. And the unions have been educating their members on, do you support this issue, reindustrialization, infrastructure, CHIPS Act, the things that we were able to accomplish, and President Biden and Vice President Harris were able to accomplish. And they educate them on that, and then 3-4 months before the election, okay, which of these 2 candidates supported these issues that support us? So it's a good strategy to communicate. So I think that's good. I personally believe that on one issue point, I think we have to talk about energy and in a very realistic way. There have been projections of the energy demand in the United States. The increase is now projected to double because of data centers, because of AI and the amount of energy used for AI, and because of the reindustrialization. So I think we need to have a real pragmatic and honest conversation around things like natural gas that has America led the world in carbon reduction from 2005 to 19 because our natural gas displaced coal. And so we have the ability to do that around the world and solve a major problem here in Europe. That's an issue piece. From a broader messaging piece, I think, and I've thought about this for months and months and months now, we have to become, Democrats in the US and Social Democrats here, whomever, the party of reform. We have to be seen. There's no trust between the average voter and leaders, politicians. The trust is eroded. And unless you're in the Donald Trump cult, which you're a blind faith. But for most people, there's no trust. And so how do you reestablish that trust? You become the party of reform. You become the party of, after 40 years, we're finally reshoring chip manufacturing from Asia to Columbus, Ohio. After all these years, we finally took on the drug companies and got insulin to $35 for Medicare recipients, and we want to do it for everybody. You look at the Affordable Care Act that President Obama did. That was a major reform, but we don't talk about it like that. Sometimes as Democrats, we're out having cocktails, we lament that we talk about the 10-point policy plan, which is bullshit. Like, nobody knows what those policy plans are. Like, we need a major reset of the party. And I think us becoming the party of reform, us taking on the big pharma, us, taking on the global economy and trying to reshore, understanding the complexities of making sure that we're not shutting ourselves off to the world. Those are making sure we're taking care of workers, making sure we're saving pensions. If you wrap that, I think, in a broader reform agenda, now you're the party, the scrappy Democratic Party that people used to remember, full of workers, full of immigrants, full of minority groups. That's the Bobby Kennedy coalition that didn't last very long because of his campaign. But Bobby Kennedy could go to the black area of Indianapolis, or he could go to the white rural area of Indiana, and he would receive the same support. And when you watched his train go from, down the East Coast, there were black folks on one side and white folks on the other side. That's the Democratic coalition. But he was a reformer. We have to be able to, and you struck a chord here, I'm getting a little fired up.
I like it.
But
Yes.
we have to, and I think we have to have this conversation too. it's so binary in the United States. So the Republicans will say, we're going to cut, cut, cut. We're going to cut Medicare. We're going to cut this. We're going to cut spending for that. And Democrats, we say, well, don't cut this and don't cut that. But I think where the space is, where the juice is in the middle for us to really pull people in, is to say, we know we're spending a lot of money on this, and we know a lot of it doesn't get the results that we want. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars on education, but yet we have a huge skills gap, right? We have a lot of people that we need educated, but we talk more about college and student loans than we do about apprenticeships and getting people into the skilled trades. We spend 2.5 times more than any other industrialized country on healthcare, and we get the worst results. Yes. You know, we spend tons of money on all kinds of different things, and we have deaths of despair that are up, overdoses are up, addictions up, fentanyl's up, suicides are up. We're doing something really wrong. We're spending the money. So I just don't want Democrats to get caught in this trap of like the one polling question, should we spend more money on? Yeah. Right? I mean, maybe, but I think we would have a lot more credibility going to voters if we said, here's our reforms. Here's what we want to do. We're going to focus on prevention. We recognize how the big industrial food companies have poisoned our people, poisoned our kids, you know, selling them junk, fake food. We're going to take them on, and we're going to reform that system because our kids deserve to be healthy, and if they're not healthy, they can't be educated. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, we're not just going to throw money at problems, although we may need to spend more here or there, because we also have deficits that we have to worry about. But the reform mantle, I think, in my heart, that if we can grab that mantle, and whether it's here or in Europe, grab that mantle of reform, because you're going to connect with people on that emotional, traumatized level. Yeah. If you're traumatized, you don't want someone just telling you your 10-point policy plan. You want to find out, and Trump says they're screwing you, and they're like, okay, I'm traumatized, I'm going to go after who Trump says is screwing me. Or we can say, they're screwing you, but we're the reform party. He's all talk, and he didn't do anything when he was in, and if we become the reform party, you know, like a Teddy Roosevelt progressive back in the day, yeah. I think the Democrats can have a long runway with having a lot of success in our political system back home.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, and well, thank you. If you're selling that, I'm buying. I think part of what you touched on there, and we've spoken about this, is the kind of the emotion that we need to connect with as well, that actually industrial policy is really important, and we all think it's important. We wouldn't have flown over here or been part of this if we didn't think it mattered and was part of the solution. But what problem is it the solution to? It's a means to a particular end, and I think what you're describing there, Tim, is kind of what that kind of mobilizing vehicle could be, which makes me wonder about where great climate policy fits in, not just good climate policy, but great climate policy. So how do we engage and mobilize great policies on the environment? Because it matters hugely. It's part of the insecurity people feel. We know that. But we could probably all have another panel on the ways we think it's communicated about, which make people actually more frightened and less likely to feel like it can be part of a reformist programme. Perhaps if I can, I'm a bit mean, but I was going to start with Holger and perhaps go to Franziska on given your experiences here on kind of the heating policy in particular, how can we make great environmental policies the answers to people's problems? Could it be part of this reform agenda?
Yes is the answer.
Yeah. No. Which way is yes, basically, is what I'm looking for.
I already mentioned that I think that we must communicate our successes and what the benefits the voters get from transition of the energy production. For example, the Conservative in Germany now aim for nuclear power plants again. In my home country, in Saxony, and last year, first time, we produced more than the half of the electricity from renewable. So And the prices at time are at the same level before the Ukraine war. So we got success, but we don't communicate that as much as we need it, I think. And that would be the question, especially because there are these concerns about inflation. If the people believe us that our reform agenda we already had in the traffic light coalition in Germany, that it will be successful. I don't think that I get another opinion in Germany. Maybe it's because of the German Angst, the famous one. But I don't think that our reform agenda or communication now can be, we need more reforms. The last vote says us, the people are a little bit tired of more reforms and more transition, and we have to communicate what we already done, and after that, because of what we will go further.
Yeah, thank you. Franziska.
I very much agree with Holger's last point. I think we have been communicating, we will reform, we will change, and people are like, no, thank you. And we have been communicating in order to be secure and to be in as good place as we were in the past, we need to change. And people are like, we don't believe you. So I think, the mistake was that everybody sort of knows that you can't continue like this with the climate, and there are tides, and there's, so sort of, it's not going the right direction. But I think the message to tell them, okay, then we will reform, they're like, So I think what we rather have to communicate is there will be change, and we will guarantee you security in this process of change. And I think that for us is, at least in Germany, I don't know how it's in the US, it's the message is rather, there will be change inevitably, but we will make sure you're safe. And bringing that to the question of energy, it was very interesting because I think at one point we managed as a coalition to communicate that fossil prices can be very volatile. Like we felt it back home very heavily. And that if you have the energy here, you're less dependent on outside volatility and make it cheaper for your own citizens. And right now we have in Germany this debate where the conservatives are going back to the fossil car and they love the fossil car. And at the same time you have this war in the Middle East and you have no idea how it will continue. And people are telling them, it's so much better to be dependent on this petrol, oil coming from the Middle East, which is such a good place to be dependent on. And I think, we need to tell more the story. Like, if you want to be dependent on this, okay, this is the conservative way. We create your car driving on the energy we have. It will be cheap and stable. And I think that's sort of more the communication, saying this is a stable, cheap way of your mobility. You can go for the fossil one. Good luck. And I think we need to find more examples of that where we create that security and also in the transformation. And I agree with you on the better spending. I really agree with you on that one. Because if we only focusing on more spending, we will also be lost at one point. Because, you have to focus on how you make it more effective and more efficient. And I think there we are often not good enough yet. I think what the Inflation Reduction Act has done very well, we rarely talk about it in Germany at least, I don't know how it's in the US, is how you linked it to training and skills. Mm-hmm. I think that was very smart. Yes. And we in Germany have a tendency to have a funding for technology X, funding for technology Y, and then we have funding for training, and then we have funding for yet another purpose. So for every single purpose, we have a spending program, which is very bureaucratic because it has a very narrow objective. Instead of saying, there's a bunch of money, take it to modernize new technologies and also train people. So I think we have to get much better at that. And this is I'm looking at your budget. And we have a very silo budget negotiations, which often doesn't really help. You have those who are doing the training part, the others are doing the energy part. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act really managed to bring those issues together. And that's what I wish we could learn from a bit from the US for our better spending on how to make this possible. And a good note, maybe, because you were mentioning the energy needs of our data centers. I met, we have a German chips manufacturer, Infineon, and they're now working with DOE and DOD in the US because they have the most energy efficient chips. And these are success stories, and we have been pushing them in Germany. You have to be energy efficient, etc. And now they get the very good contracts, because if you send them out in a weapon system or in space, they need to be energy efficient. So I think we really also need to communicate on these transatlantic, where you make your country safer because you have energy efficient chips from Germany.
Very good. Very good. I like
Great plug.
From Germany.
Yes.
I'm going to ask our audience now if you've got any questions that you would like to ask the panel. You can, if you want a specific member of the panel particularly to answer them, please say so. Otherwise, I will just use my loaf, as we would say it in Britain. So just about 3 rows from the back. I don't know. Yes, we have mics coming. So if you just wait for the mics. And if you could introduce who you are, that would be wonderful.
My name is Colleen Doherty. I currently work at the NOAC Metro Finance Lab at Drexel University, so do a lot with federal spending and from Erie, Pennsylvania. So happy to see a Youngstown person up there. I feel like in this panel, you've talked a lot about the industrial policy in times of geoeconomic shifts, but I want to understand your grasp on foreign policy for the middle class and what that means. As we know, Jake Sullivan in the US wrote a very interesting piece about it, and the last panelist who spoke talked a little bit about what we can learn from one another, but that's a big part of what I'm trying to understand, is what we can learn without idea stealing, et cetera. So I would just love all of you to talk a little bit about foreign policy for the middle class, because that's a very specific term that I feel like in the US we don't think about a lot.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a couple of, perhaps let's take a couple of contributions and questions at this time. Yes, can we go to this person here, and then we'll come to this person here.
Hi, my name is Vera. I work for the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation. And my question would be, so I don't think we can hope for an economic trickle-down effect any soon, and especially Eastern innovative hubs. So what can we give the people so that they feel that they directly profit from this transition already now? Or even in the US, maybe you have good examples. You talked about healthcare a little bit, but I don't know if they actually make the cognitive connection between transition and healthcare.
Thank you. And sorry, there was a question, in the middle there, and then we'll come back for another round after.
Hi, my name is Anton. I work for Miller & Meyer Consulting, a public affairs consultancy in Berlin. We were talking about the issue that people need to sort of understand more the successes we are making in tackling climate change, right? Or in also transitioning to renewables. And there was once this idea that the Greens push a lot, which is called the Klimageld, the lump sum redistribution of carbon tax revenue. And I was just generally interested in how you, maybe Ms. Brantner, but maybe also Mr. Mann, think about this instrument as an instrument to bringing maybe more public acceptance to this shift, and also if you think that this is still feasible within the current legislative period.
Sorry, could you just explain the policy word that you used?
The Klimageld. It's like sort of like a lump sum redistribution of explain, not name. Yeah, sorry. It's sort of like so you incur carbon tax revenue,
right?
And then you just sort of like make a lump sum redistribution of that tax revenue per capita equally to all people in Germany.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Just policy translations rather than language translations. Great. Well, perhaps we come to that first question first, and perhaps I'll come to Brencia first, because it was a phrase that was used first by, as the speaker said, by Jake Sullivan, this foreign policy for the middle classes, which my understanding is, as Franziska said, it's kind of this idea that we can. This is part of this industrial policy, is part of how we can have a different type of foreign policy in a very uncertain world. We have our version of it in the UK, but I would love to hear your thoughts on how you think that develops now.
I think that it's really important, and folks have said it on this panel, that we find the balance of really fighting back against the nationalism that Trump and the Republicans are sticking to.
Yeah.
And we have to give real examples of, and I'll go back to climate as an example. And my same ethos applies here of connecting it to people and families. It's something that I feel like we can and should be doing, even on the political side. I know that the administration has all these programs, but when I was talking to Secretary Granholm directly, it's the first time that I realized, oh, I could get tax credits for energy efficient appliances. And I am the political director of the Democratic Party. So how do we make those connections with middle class people, with working people on, what we are doing collectively, right? And the amazing examples from what's being done here and some of the redistribution, but we really have to break it down to how it impacts people in order for people to not be nervous about, to you all's point about change, feeling like something might be taken from them or things might become more expensive for them, but demonstrating how we can work together with our allies to not just be innovative and move everything forward for the US, but how it will also help us lower costs for working people is, to me, the connection that we have to make.
Indeed. Franziska, and you touched on this same point, really, which is that actually many of the measures that Trump would introduce, whether he talks about them in foreign policy or economic policy, would actually be inflationary, that we have much more disruption of our stable supplies, which is like these are two completely interconnected things. You just touched on it, but would you like to see more if we moved into a different era of security?
When we talk about the foreign policy middle classes, I think when we talk about security and link it to our own, but we also need to link it to the middle classes in Chile or in South Africa, because otherwise we will not be secure in this world if we do not manage to make that a joint project. And I think that shifting, because if you just say, for me, there's always a difference when you say America first or Germany first, or if you say America first and single, or Germany first and single. And that going from America first to America first and single is very easy if you do not push against it and say, okay, we love the US, but we know there are other places out there. And I think the question is, how can we make many countries of the Global South part of this endeavor? We haven't really grappled how to do it, because this would require our companies to invest in these countries much more. Like the Chinese are doing it all the time. They have a bunch of state funding behind it. So we would need to get our companies to invest there, which is usually more expensive because they don't have forced labor. So who will pay the price difference? How do we make this a fair competition? So I think this is really, as I said, we are working on some of the ways, but I think we really haven't really gotten yet the good answer to that. And then if you say, on the Klimageld, if you allow me to answer, because that was, I think, directed to us. I think it is very interesting because, of course, we have, in the middle of the crisis, taking away a levy that was taxed or like is on EEG-Umlage, so the renewable energy, how do you say Umlage? EEG-Umlage, help me, somebody help me. So it's basically, it was a redistribution of cost of the renewables to the consumers of energy, okay? So that one we have scrapped, and it's about 6-7 billion that we have been alleviating from citizens. It's a lot of money. If you go out any German and ask them, have you felt that this was done? They will tell you no. No. Even though it was a lot of money to our federal budget. And if you want to make that equivalence in a Klimageld, in order for people to really feel it and for it to be significant, the CO2 price level needs to be quite high. So that is the downturn on, so how much higher can you go on CO2 pricing so that the Klimageld makes sense without people starting first to scream because they will feel the price immediately, and then at the end of the year they get the check and part of the money back. Mm-hmm. You know, I really think we have to think this through on how it works well. The Austrians have done now a way which I find is quite smart because they have like in Germany or the US, the renewable energy burden is more on the countryside than in the cities. And like wind farms, solar plants, they're usually in the countryside, not so much in New York. I haven't seen so many panels on the roofs. But they need the energy. So what Austria did is that they have this redistribution between city and countryside. So you have a climate profit that goes to the countryside, which has been hugely popular, because then you can say, my green agenda is an agenda for the rural areas. So these are, I think, some avenues we're trying to think through how to make this not just per capita all the same, and then it's so little and it doesn't have an impact, but really to see who do we really need to benefit from this? How do we need to make sure we don't lose our countryside? How do we need to, how can we ensure rural areas are behind the climate agenda? So, for me, it's not a yes or no. The question is how, what kind of CO2 price levels do you need? And I think we're not yet at a perfect result. I know there are many smart people working on this right now. And we're working as Greens on it, not me as a ministry, but like as the Greens. But I think, yes, we have to really think it through, and it has to work, because otherwise it might backfire a lot.
I'm conscious that we also had a question on there not being the trickle down, and how do we get to grips with that. But I'm just going to ask for any other questions from the audience first, then I'll ask you each to come back on the questions that you would like to, and any final closing comments. Could we just have the mic to gentleman third row back? And then, yes, to this person at the front here, please. Yes, thank you. And then to this person here.
Hi, I'm Greta Woltenberg. I'm active in the climate and social justice movement and civil society. And what I always try to ask politicians about all of these topics, basically, that we are talking about here and today, is what do you need out of society to be able to maybe, invent and apply new and better and more progressive policies, like what would give you the support needed?
Great question. And yeah, just the third row back.
Thanks a lot. I'm Johannes Jung. I'm a head of department in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Labor and Tourism of the state of Baden-Württemberg. 2 questions. Claire, you showed us in the early beginning of the session some slides with questions and answers on the topic how to protect home industry. Thinking about this issue, I come to the conclusion, as usual, yes, we will protect our home industry, at least in Baden-Württemberg, which is one of the advanced regions and the most globalized regions. We will protect it by strengthening competitiveness, innovation, international cooperation and things like that. That leads me to the question to Franziska Brantner. What about the tech and trade format of European Union and the US and IRA? What about the future of this format in this year and next year, probably? And second question, we are mentioning the middle class. The upper class will take care of itself, but what about the lower class?
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask us to do final responses, to keep them to a minute, I'm afraid, because we will need to wrap up shortly. If I can come to Holger first, and also to perhaps address this question on the trickle down.
Okay, trickle down and lower class. I also already mentioned lower wages have to rise, and a minimum wage have to rise. The state has to communicate and also to demonstrate that in times of changing, he's a partner for security. So let's stop shit-talking about the German Bürgergeld. So it's not good for this transition we have to face with. In Eastern Germany, I have also to say more public institutions. There's still a lack of, and of course, representation. If that are not the successes of the people who were born there, they won't go with us for this transition. And last question to the environment movement. I wish that there's more optimistic approach on that part of the way we already gone, because especially in Friday's movement, they say everything's disastrous, we are in doom mode, and we already take more than 50% of renewable energy. That's something we can communicate with proud, but we don't do it. So, and we need more optimistic approach on this.
Thank you, and under a minute as well, Franziska.
I'm sorry, I was just thinking, it's so German, you know, the glass is never half full. But about your question on the tech innovation and how I got back from the US, I was there mainly for the so-called ICE talks. They haven't taken place in 5 years because these are the innovation tech talks between Germany and the US, and they were sort of stopped when the EU and the US started to do their on that level. And now we said, let's start the ICE talks again, also Germany, the US, and maybe use that to kickstart for Biden too. Hopefully then an arrangement or agreement on resilient and sustainable supply chains and tech standards. And I think that would be the most efficient we could do. We, for that, have to be a bit less restrictive in our interpretation of WTO law, because as you know, mutual regional trade agreements have to be substantially all trade. So we would have to include agriculture. But as soon as you include agriculture, you will not have a trade deal with the EU for decades to come. So we will have to be, on our European side, I think we have to convince the Commission to go into such an area to say, let's do it for the clean tech, for the supply chains, let's do this, let's create an area. And we can launch to other partners in the world. And on the American side, you also have to, do your part of the work of saying we are ready to get this through house. But I think that would be immediately worthwhile for our companies on both sides of the Atlantic.
Thank you. Brencia, your final thoughts?
Well, I'll just, I guess, I wanted to say, I used to work for Senator Warren before coming to work at the DNC, and I know it's out of context here in the US, but definitely along the lines of what Congressman Ryan was talking about in terms of progressive policies, reformists, and being really strong on that. And I think it's both and in terms of how we make those connections. And what we saw too was a lot of people who are Trump supporters also supported Senator Sanders, right? And so that's where what Congressman Ryan really, it connects the dots on people are really tired of the status quo and they want to see change. And I think it's both and that we tell the story of what we've already done in a way that connects with people while making sure that we're very clear about when it comes to the support we need for progressive policies, that it is the oil companies that are increasing the costs of gas and making sure that people understand what impacts corporate greed has on inflation and their cost of living and gas prices. These executives and the people, people are making a ton of money, and it is impacting the middle class, the people that are living in poverty, and we have to be very clear about what that is. It is not our trade policies and being unified and working with our allies. It is corporate greed that is causing the prices to increase, and Trump and Republicans will only further that agenda.
Thank you. Tim, final minute to you.
Yeah, I want to take just a half a step back when you talk about security and and say that we are a divided country. We're even divided within our own parties. So it's not Democrat, Republican. Within the parties, we've got a lot of division. And I think we need, in America, again, there's always these differences, but a national service project, like a big Peace Corps for America, whatever you want to call it. We need people in urban areas and people in rural areas and Democrats and Republicans from around our country to come together around a project that has nothing to do with them or their egos or their political parties, to do something good for somebody else. And start kicking in that idea. We had it through the World War II generation, the greatest generation in America, because they fought together, they went through a depression together, their memories were seared that they were stronger together. And the spiritual reality is we're all interconnected. You know, it's a biological reality. Like, we are connected. And if we're so far from that right now, where we think, you know, my win has to be your loss, you know, or your win has to be my loss. And we will fix none of this if we don't fix that kind of reconnect to each other as human beings, that we all have the same concerns about our kids, about the environment, about the planet, about our status in life. And we have to get back to that. And I think everything, be the last thing I say, politics is downstream from culture. And we've got to get into the culture. And the culture has to be a culture of togetherness, of fellowship, of concern and care for each other. And we're allowed to disagree. You don't have to hate each other. Because I have this position on how we both agree on climate, and I say we go this way, and you say we go that way. Or we both agree on solving poverty, and my idea is this, and your idea is that. We don't have to hate each other for that, you know? I used this joke in my last campaign. I'd said, you know, people think they got to agree with the president 100% of the time. And they think they have to agree with their senator 100% of the time, and their congressman 100% of the time. And so I would be in a room like this, and I would ask, are any of you married? Like, I love my wife more than anybody in the world. If we have 10 conversations in one day and we agree on 7 of them, we crack a bottle of wine and celebrate how great our marriage is. You know, so if the person you love the most, you don't agree 10 out of 10, why would you think that your parliamentarian or your prime minister or your president or your chancellor, you're going to agree with them 100%? That doesn't even make any sense. So let's step back, let's reconnect, let's figure out ways to disagree, and then start tackling some of these really big problems.
Brilliant. Well, please join me in saying a big thank you to our fantastic panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was excellent. Thank you. Maria.
Okay. That was a great session, not only on socioeconomic transformations, but also some marriage counseling. Thank you very much. Right. Yeah, but I'm back on the stage, what means that, guess what? We are heading towards a coffee break. It is a short break, 15 minutes. We will meet again at 5:45. And I'll give you a heads up what's coming. This will be the last block of sessions. Breakout session here at the main stage. Freedom, Power, and Capitalism, Enhancing Material Security. This is a session co-hosted with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. In the forum on the right, Green European Journal launch. So that's a green event. And in the boardroom, that's a session which is by invitation only, and it's the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the progressive governance. So make sure you know where to go, and be there at 5:45. Thank you.